There aren't a lot of killers out there, I think, who are as brazen or as terrifying as the one I'm going to be telling you about today. The one known as the Austrian Ripper. But even that name, I feel, doesn't do this story justice for how insane it is. This is truly one of those stories, I think, of people doing the most crazy, mental gymnastics to avoid what is staring them directly in the face.
Aber es gibt doch scheinbar auch ein Muster, das auch dem entspricht, des Mordes, den sie in den 70er Jahren begangen haben.
Welches Muster?
Es hat zum Beispiel, wurden die erdrosselt.
Jeder Mord wird irgendwie begangen.
It started off with a murder, then prison, followed by celebrity status, then many, many more murders. Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, I have a story for you of Jack Unterweger, possibly one of the scariest and most twisted serial killers of the last few decades. He was in prison, he was a celebrity, he was a journalist, and he was a very scary man. But before we get into all of that, please subscribe to see new stories for the dark every single Tuesday. Now, you and I, let's give it a go. It was 1991, a hot summer, and in Los Angeles, a startling number of bodies were starting to appear in the downtown area of the city, specifically the area known as Skid Row. Even more specifically, not far from the infamous Cecil Hotel, which would become famous many years later with the strange and bizarre death of Elisa Lam. But even back in 1991, there was already something incredibly dark in that very horrifying place. The victims, though, that were showing up in this summer of 1991 were all sex workers, and they were all strangled and murdered in a very, very specific way. It seemed like the killer had a very specific MO. Each were killed, strangled, with their own bra. The bras had been removed, and then cuts had been made, very specific cuts, to turn these bras into sort of makeshift garrots. The police were sort of at a loss as to who could be behind this, and unfortunately these cases were just not high priority for the police, for the LAPD, and didn't really get the attention they deserved. And quite frankly, this being Skid Row and the victims being sex workers, they were never going to get high priority from the police, which we have seen, I think, just a couple of times in these stories. Back in Austria, though, there was a very similar situation going on. They too, across the ocean back in Europe, were having a startling number of sex workers appear dead. All done, it seemed, by the same killer. They were all killed in the exact same way. All had been lured into a car, taken out into the woods, abused, and then strangled to death, always with a piece of their own clothing. And these had appeared in a very short space of time. There were sort of these murmurings of who could be behind this startling number of murders, which was 7 only in Austria. And that was 7 murders in about 7 months. And Austria, small country, very low crime rate. So, someone was getting busy, as you can probably imagine. The thing was, though, the murmurings that was going on about who could be this suspect, well, it was sort of the very last person anyone wanted to admit about who could be doing this. People in Vienna and in the media and journalists and all this sort of thing, they were sort of against the idea of even mentioning his name as a possible suspect in all of these murders. They didn't even want to think it was possible he could do it. Again, he was a reformed criminal, he was a celebrity, he just rocked. Everybody loved him, mad about him. And even about these 7 murders in Austria. Sure, if you wanted to speak with him, he's in Los Angeles now. Oh yeah, right, though, where more victims were now appearing. Talk about bringing the bad weather with you. This guy was a famous writer, and in Los Angeles, he had immediately introduced himself to the LAPD, and he had done ride-alongs with the police, specifically asking the police to take him to the red light districts in the city, specifically Skid Row. He was saying he wanted to go there, see it all, because he wrote, for magazines, for newspapers about sex workers, about red light districts around the world, so he wanted, boots on the ground. That was the thing, right? He wrote about these issues, necessitating him to go to these places, and when he did, people just ended up dead as hell. His name was Jack Unterweger. Author, journalist, influencer, reformed criminal, and serial killer. There's a bit here, so let's go back and begin at the beginning. As I've been getting older, it feels like I'm always thinking to myself, I should go see the doctor about this or that. Like just a few months ago, I had this really bad pain in my leg, and after leaving it and thinking it'll go away by itself for far too long, I finally called up the local doctors to make an appointment, only to find out they were all booked up in like ridiculous advance. And it can be frustrating. You want to do the right thing. Go see a professional instead of Googling your symptoms at like 2 a.m. But it can feel like the system is working against you. We would all probably see doctors more often if it weren't such a hassle to find one who's available, who will take your insurance, and who won't make you wait 3 weeks to be seen. That's where today's sponsor, ZocDoc, comes in. ZocDoc is a free website that makes booking a healthcare appointment feel like less of a battle. You can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors, read verified patient reviews, and book an appointment instantly. No awkward phone calls, no being put on hold, no stress. Whether you're looking for mental health support, dental, eye doctors, dermatologists, you name it, ZocDoc has over 100,000 providers in nearly every specialty. And you know how important it is that when you do go see a doctor, they take the time to actually listen to you rather than just ticking off the boxes and saying, you're good to go. You and I both want a doctor who really listens to you and whose advice you can trust rather than feeling like you need a second opinion. When you do find a doctor you can trust, you know your health is in safe hands and it's such a weight off your shoulders. ZocDoc makes that entire process easy and accessible. With ZocDoc, you can filter by doctors who take your insurance, are nearby, have great reviews, and, best of all, actually have open appointments. You can get to see real-time availability and book something that works with your schedule. A lot of times, it's just 24 to 72 hours out. Sometimes even same day. You can see their actual appointment openings, choose a time that works for you, and click to instantly book a visit. You don't have to talk to anybody, thankfully. Just book with a few clicks. And did I mention it's free? I feel like that should be a bigger deal because it's pretty incredible. So stop putting off those appointments and take care of yourself. Go to ZocDoc.com/thatchapter or click the link in the description and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Big thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Old Jack was a hell of a guy. He was a globe-trotting serial killer who hid in plain sight. Everybody loved him. He was a celebrity in his home country of Austria. He was charming and funny as all hell. And it was all a big lie. Not even just like the secret serial killer, business, all that sort of shite. Everything about him was fake, was phony. Kind of like in that American Psycho style. Jack Unterweger just simply wasn't there. Jack Unterweger was born in Austria in 1950, the son of an American soldier who had been based in Austria post-World War II and an Austrian waitress/sex worker. I'm going to read out a portion of Jack's book called Purgatory. This is taken, by the way, from Entering Hades by John Leake, which is my main source for this whole video. Of my paternity, I only knew a name. The GI came from Trieste. His home was in New Jersey. Perhaps he gave coveted dollars or silk stockings for it. Perhaps it was a great but doomed love between the soldier and the girl who was too young and without the means to be my mother. Jack was named after his father, but as I said, he never actually met his father, and when he was 2 years old, his mom was arrested for fraud. So Jack, very young, was sent to live with his grandfather in the Alps. And boy oh boy, was that just not good for Jack, at all. It was no bueno. That's according to Jack, that was no good for Jack. His grandfather was a violent, drunk, horrible alcoholic who just bait 7 shades of shite out of Jack on a regular basis, didn't give him enough food to eat, didn't give him any clothing or any affection whatsoever. Again, let me read you out just a little something from Jack's semi-autobiography. My eyes burned from the smoky air in the low little room. The women prattled, the men played cards, and I was the house and court fool, a slave, educated by grandfather to be a fraud's accomplice. I sat on his lap, playing dumb. Later, I moved to my uncle's lap and betrayed his cards to Grandpa. I was the ace in his sleeve. His fists were my teacher, and I was a good student. Jack would say his grandfather was just horrible. He would force young Jack to watch him have sex with all of these women. Let the boy watch. That kind of thing. Real sick shit. And you're hearing this about Jack's upbringing, right? And you're like, shit. This is no wonder he would become a serial killer later in life if that's how he grew up. That's awful. That's, of course, what Jack wanted you to think. He would eventually leave his grandfather and go move in with his auntie named Anna Unterweger. She too was a sex worker, but with a heart of gold. But she would eventually, tragically too, she too would be murdered And it was like, just tragedy followed Jack Unterweger everywhere he went. So you'd be reading this in Jack's autobiography and you'd be thinking, God love him, with this sort of upbringing. None of this is true. Jack was brought up by his grandfather at a very young age after his mom was arrested, but he was loved and taken care of by all accounts. Jack was kind of known as actually the little shicer around town. He's a bit of a little shitbag from get-go. But of course, Jack would eventually get out from them. He would get out of town. He would move to Vienna, capital of Austria, and he would just begin this like big old life of crime. Just real shitty stuff too, if you can believe that. When he was 16, for example, he was arrested for stealing money from guests at the hotel where he worked. He bounced around from job to job, waiter, disc jockey, and was sort of a popular fella. Like, he was charming, he was good looking, and people thought he was great. But what people didn't know about Jack Unterweger was a lot, to be frank. And I'm Mike. In his late teens, he started pimping out women on the streets of Vienna, and he was a real small-time criminal before he was even 20. Thieving, waitering, DJing, and pimping was the name of the game for old Jack. But he had a more violent side, especially towards women, and it was around this time that he really learned a little something about old Jack, and that was that he really got off on being extremely violent and abusive to women. He would take these women out. A lot of times these were women he himself was pimping, and just take them into the woods and just abuse them horrifically. From 1966 to 1974, he was actually convicted, if you can believe it, 16 times. 16 times of burglary, theft, pimping, sexual assault, and just regular assault. He would be in and out of prison a lot, but never really got much more than a slap on the wrist, which I think is probably the biggest problem with Jack Unterweger, is that because he never really suffered any true consequences of his actions as a youth, it gave him this like sense of vulnerability. He could do whatever he wanted, and he would never face any real consequences for what he was doing, which was like, I mean, you know, traumatically abusing these poor women. From what I gathered, the Austrian justice system, like at the time, they weren't very good at dissuading criminals. You know, just the old slap on the wrist and kind of hoping they won't do it again was not really working. And I suppose it's the same actually with a lot of European countries and justice systems where, you know, sometimes the consequences aren't bad enough to stop them from doing it. So it's really kind of trying to find a balance in consequences for actions. But in Jack, it was just nothing. It was just nothing. And this is still in Jack's early days. Like, listen to this, right? The first real incident that got him in a bit of trouble was in 1971. He lured a sex worker to his car, drove off into the woods, stripped her, beat her, raped her, horrifically assaulted her, and it was only stopped when a passerby saw them in the car and thought they'd broken down, so went over for assistance, and the woman managed to get away and get help. Jack was arrested for this. But while he was in jail, he managed to smuggle in some painkillers and did the old fake overdose, attempt. That got him moved to a psychiatric facility, and then he was just let go. So literally nothing happened to him. Attaboy. His first sort of like not proven murder was in 1973 when the body of a 23-year-old woman, Yugoslavian woman named Marika, was found floating in a lake. Jack had been living near there at the time when her body was found. She had been bound, she'd been beaten, and she'd been thrown into the lake while she was still alive. Her cause of death was drowning, and it was found that her hands had been bound with a very specific necktie that Jack was known to have. He was looked at as a suspect at the time, he was questioned, but nothing really further went there. It'd actually be decades later that a woman would say he had done it, but she was too scared to say it at the time. She was scared of him. Jack's first murder conviction, though, happened in 1974 when he was 24 years of age. So what happened was, right, at the time, Jack was dating a woman named Barbara. Jack and Barbara thought they needed some money, so they thought, bright spark, right? Let's go to Barbara's parents' house. Sneak in, we'll rob the place. They drove over, shit balls. Barbara's parents just happened to be home at the time, so they were like, we can't rob it now. So eventually they were in the car driving around her hometown at night, and they came across this woman who happened to be just walking home. Her name was Margaret Schaefer. Pulled up alongside Margaret. Asked her, do you want to ride home? She said, yeah. So they headed off. Jack was driving. Margaret and Barbara were in the back seat. Just, yapping away. And at one point, Barbara let slip something to Margaret about It could have been about the robbery they were attempting to do against their parents or some kind of criminal activity. We don't really know what. But Jack, who's driving, hears this, pulls the car over, turns around to Barbara and is like, "Is there anything else you want to tell her?" Then he grabbed Margaret, dragged her into the front of the car, and told her if she didn't resist, they wouldn't hurt her. Then he grabbed Barbara's belt, took Barbara's belt off her and bound Margaret's hands with the belt. They robbed Margaret of any cash she had on her, which was like $40. They then drove to Margaret's apartment, robbed it some more, got like another $40. And then Barbara directed them to a lonely place in the woods. Jack dragged a now naked Margaret into the forest. Barbara remained back at the car and she said, 15 minutes later, Jack came back. Just Jack. Margaret's body was found 3 weeks later. An absolute, well, it was pretty horrifying. Now, the authorities actually solved this murder sort of relatively quickly. They knew the victims, so they, spread out from there. They started questioning all of Margaret's friends and her family, and eventually Barbara was her friend. They started yapping away to Barbara, and Barbara cracked, like, almost instantly, and then she told them the entire story of that night and that Jack Unterweger had murdered Margaret Schaefer. They arrested Jack then. Not really too sure, by the way, what happened to Barbara. She doesn't appear in the story again. I think she got 8 years for her involvement in Margaret Schaefer's murder and then just kind of like vanished. So now you got Jack, arrested for the murder of Margaret Schaefer, suspected in another murder of that Yugoslavian woman, and with a rap sheet as long as a certain book he will write, well, he was thrown in a can. See ya never, life in prison for Jack Unterweger. Unfortunately, all of what I just told is still the backstory of Jack, because now things get insane. So Jack is in prison, the big house, and to fill the long-ass empty days, he became a little scribbler. He begins to write a bit. Like any writers watching, if you have writer's block, maybe just go to prison. It worked for him. After 3 years in the can, he did a course on literature and he began writing a lot. See, in the 70s, in Austria 1970s, rehabilitation was the big word. And I suppose, to be fair, rehabilitation should still be a big word. But, in Jack's case, rehabilitation is the perfect word. For people don't change, they just get better at hiding. Jack began writing short stories, plays. Some of these are even broadcast on, Austria public radio. And people would tune in to listen to Jack's stories. And it was weird. It was sort of like, if you were listening to a story being told on the radio and then they told you, oh, the person writing this is a convicted murderer, you might be kind of like, that's gross. Does the victim's family know about this? Because this is kind of disgusting. But at this time, it was more viewed as completely different. It was viewed as wow, how can a monster created something so beautiful? Maybe he's not a monster after all. This is, he's learning, he's reflecting via writing stories. He's getting evil out of him via his little scribbles. Honestly, what I'm going to get into is that, even in the penal system's eyes, Jack was the victim, not the actual victims. In 1983, though, Jack published his first full-ass book, and it was titled, I'm going to butcher the German here, it was titled Füge für oder die Reise ins Zuchthaus. In English, that's Purgatory or The Journey to Prison. Really, though, just the book became known as Purgatory. Now, the book isn't like Jack's strict autobiography. It's written as a novel, but it seemed to match Jack's life so well that people basically just began to view it as his autobiography, that it was all about Jack's life up to this point. So everybody believed it was an autobiography, and everybody believed everything in the book was true. Like the passages I read out at the beginning, which I already said was complete bullshit. About the abusive childhood, about, his auntie who was a sex worker who was murdered. None of these things were true, but this book was released. It was a smash hit, and sympathy for Jack just grew, and it grew, and it grew. People were reading this book and being like, oh, sure, geez, look at his upbringing. What a lost soul, poor guy. Of course he became a criminal. Take pity on him, sure he didn't even have a chance. My hands, sweaty with fear, were twisted onto my back, and the steel shackles snapped around my wrists. I awake, trembling. Fearfully I gaze into the unknown darkness of the next minutes. Sometimes during these moments before dawn, I think I should take my leave. A new package of razor blades lies ready. Also a long leather strap. I've prepared for the minute of the last decision. I see my body go to sleep, with a final convulsion, fleeing from this lonely vegetative life. Is that the answer? Now, a couple of tree things about the book called Purgatory. So, the title Purgatory is, based on the Catholic belief that if you're a sinner, but not like a real evil sinner, after you die, you'll go to purgatory, spend some time there, and then eventually you'll get to go to heaven. And that's why Jack called it Purgatory, because he believed he deserved heaven after spending time in prison. So he was essentially saying, I committed some bad shit, but I'm still a good guy. And I deserve to, be free. Secondly, the book Purgatory, you're probably asking, yeah, the book never mentions the horrifying murder of Margaret Schaefer he committed to get himself into prison. Skips over that thing. Oh, why I'm actually here? Don't worry about it. Thirdly, it was all lies. Half of it was based on movies that Jack watched and he liked, and the other half were just stolen from just other books. He just stole shit from everybody else around him. He made it all up to gain a lot of sympathy. And it worked. It really, really worked. When it came out in 1983, it was a hit. Everybody was reading it, everybody was talking about it. There would even later be a movie made. Jack was on set for the making of that movie. He received awards for Purgatory and for a play he wrote. He was there, opening night. Still, like, a convicted prisoner in prison. But they let him out on day release to attend the premiere of this play he had written. Let me actually just show you a real quick snippet of the movie that's based on Purgatory. The movie came out in 1988, 5 years after the book. Let's have a look.
Als mir die Zigaretten ausgingen, begann ich mich mit der Anklageschrift zu beschäftigen.
Yeah, looks like shit. And so began this campaign to get him released. Everybody on the radio, talk shows, newspapers, people were writing letters. It was a whole shebang to get Jack Unterweger out of prison because people were reading this book. They had a lot of sympathy for him from his upbringing, and the book just seemed like such a self-reflection that he truly seemed like contrite about what he had done. Again, skipping over the whole murder, which is why he was in prison. But everybody's like, man, we need to get him out. The prison warden, where Jack was, would say, we will never find a prisoner so well prepared for freedom. Psychologists would, interview him when he became the celebrity, saying, yeah, he's fit to rejoin society. We gotta let him out. Let him out. He's one of the good ones, folks. And if you don't think so, read the book, why don't you? He's a changed man. Let him out, boys. And the real thing was that he became this, major success story for the Austrian government's push towards prisoner rehabilitation. Now, I guess I should also just point out here at this point that not really everybody was clamoring to get him out. I mean, there were people who met him and could see right through his, happy, charming, guten Tag with a wink, facade that he had and that he used all the time. People would say, yeah, I can see that he's a dead-eyed motherfucker who does not deserve to be out because he is making the skin on the back of my neck or the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There's something very, very wrong with him. I think he is evil. But most people just bought into it. And of course, there was another minority saying, yeah, if the public knew what he had done to Margaret Schaefer and all of those other poor women, they wouldn't be clamoring to let him back out in the streets. But in what might be the biggest whoops of all time, the other side won out. And in 1990, after doing 15 years in prison, Jack was out, and he was now a celebrity. He was on the red carpets. He was on the talk shows, the radios, the newspapers interviews, the magazine photo shoots, everything. He would be doing all these photo shoots with all of his tattoos, which, as you can see, bit weird.
Die Leistung, die Eigeninitiative wird vom Strafvollzuginstitution unterdrückt. Bei dem weißen Anzug hat man niemand geschenkt, den hat man verdient. Dann wird sie es verstehen und auch akzeptieren. Haben Sie den extra anzogen für jetzt? Ja, für heute fest. Wenn ich etwas leiste, dann wird auch die Gesellschaft verstehen, wenn ich bedingt entlassen bin. Nur die Justiz macht mich so weit kaputt und schwach da drin in der Institution, in diesem Massendruck über Jahre hinweg, 10 Mann in der Zelle oder so, wie immer, dass der Mensch schwach wird.
Within just a couple of weeks of being out, he bought a brand new, incredibly expensive Mercedes with a vanity plate that read W. Jack 1.
Ich habe 15 Jahre gegen jedes Gesetz im Strafvollzugsgesetz verstoßen. Hätte ich das nicht gemacht, wäre ich heute wahrscheinlich weder Autor, noch in Freiheit, noch mit Boden unter den Füßen.
He was cool as shit, he was a rock star, life at a party. Everybody loved Jack. He was cool because he was a former criminal and he was kind of like a badass. But he was charming. He was a symbol of, hope, rehabilitation, all of those things. Everybody wanted a piece of him and, he was good looking, he was charming, he was cool.
Widerstand war mein Mittel, sie zu zwingen, sich mit mir auseinanderzusetzen. Und das ist so weit gegangen, dass sie resigniert haben und gesagt haben, lasst den Neuen in Ruhe, der ist eh nicht normal. Und so habe ich mir einen Freiraum geschaffen, in dem ich das alles schaffen konnte, was ich heute habe. Das heißt, ich war 15 Jahre in Stein Rechtsbrecher, um heute in der Öffentlichkeit und in der Gesellschaft als Mitglied leben zu können.
Though when he was asked about the actual murder that landed him in prison, the part he conveniently left out of the book, he would just be ready with this sob story of drugs, alcohol, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and you know what? Margaret looked at such... I killed Margaret because she looked exactly like my mom who abandoned me, when I was 2 years old, and I kind of just lost it. It was out of my mind. My mom had left me at the hands of a violent alcoholic, so when I saw a woman who looked like her, it just snapped. Always ready with some other little violin. He would go on to write numerous more books and plays, though none really lived up to Purgatory, unfortunately for him. They're all kind of sort of not quite good. People were just not as enchanted with Jack as they had been with his first novel. And you know what? It kind of makes me think, you know what they say, right? They say, write what you know. Well, Jack wrote in his first book about his kind of sort of half-true life of crime. And well, now that he's out of prison, Jack was thinking, I need a new spark, a new inspiration for my mega follow-up hit to Purgatory. That will keep him as the celebrity he just simply loved being. So soon, there would be a lot more murders. That was when the shit really hit the fan. If you can believe it, less than 3 months after he was released from prison, he would kill again. Upon his release, Jack ended up getting a job at the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, and he would write for magazines, news shows, that sort of thing. And the subject he was focusing on were his victims. He would write all these articles about sex workers. He went to Prague in the Czech Republic, he claimed, because he wanted to write about the red light district there. And he would tell people, I'm going there, gotta drive over there, gotta get boots on the ground, type stuff, interview all these people, be seen in all these places, when in reality, a 30-year-old butcher's employee named Blanca never came home one night. Her body was found in the river the next morning, naked and strangled. His MO remained the same as it had 15 years previous, before he had actually gone to prison. Blanca, she was a butcher's employee by day, she was a sex worker by night. He would pick up sex workers, take them to a remote place, get them naked, beat them, rape them, and then strangle them to death, usually with a piece of their own clothing, before dumping their body in a place it would be found. And he would nearly always not rob his victims. He would leave the jewelry and stuff there with them as if, he wanted them to be found, and murder was the motive itself. So the first murder he committed post-prison was on September 14th, 1990. The next murder would be at the end of October. That was 41-year-old Brunhild Masser, and that was back in Austria. Her body was found by kids in the forest. In December 1990, 31-year-old Heidi Hammer, she disappeared. Her body would be found 3 weeks later, again in the woods. And when this, started happening, people would be like, I seen this Mercedes with W. Jack 1 license plate in the area around the time she went missing. They would kind of be like, maybe that's a suspect, because I haven't seen that car before. But of course, Jack was supposed to be there. He would be in these red light districts doing assignments, or a woman would go missing, and he just so happens to be doing a book signing or a book reading of Purgatory in the area. And so he would do the book signing, in a cafe, or do a reading, and then be like, all right, okay, I got to go to the red light district to, write an article And then wouldn't a woman just happen to go missing? But nobody suspected him. And of course, he's reformed. He's rehabilitated. No way, Jose, would he ever kill again. Have you read the book? Read Purgatory. It'll change your life. In March 1991, 35-year-old Elfriede Schrempf, she disappeared. Her body wouldn't be found for another 7 months. Same MO. She was a sex worker, lured into his car, driven to the remote woods, stripped, beaten, raped, strangled to death with a piece of her own clothing. Really horrifying stuff. And the fact that he would kill them with their own clothing was just sort of made it even more horrifying. It's like he didn't need anything. He didn't bring a weapon with him. They weren't ever found stabbed or anything like that. He was just, ready to go. And then he really began to speed up his killing. April 8th, 1991, he murdered Sylvia Zagler. A week later, Sabine Moitzi. 12 days later, Regina Prem. 10 days later, Karen Iraglu Sladki. The story of Regina Prem it actually might be the most horrifying because she disappeared in April 1991. Her body wouldn't be found for another year, but her husband, when she disappeared, her husband was extremely distraught. He would put out rewards, there was 10,000 Australian monies at the time, to get her back. He would be in the news, putting up posters and all this kind of stuff. And he started getting prank calls from Jack Unterweger, saying all sorts of horrifying things over the phone, calling him at 5 a.m. It was just really, really, I'm sorry to say, he's just a real freaking shitbag. Sorry, excuse the language, but he sucks. And Jack made all of this a part of his work. It gave him some kind of really perverse pleasure. He would write articles and stories about all these sex workers being murdered. He would interview the police about the murders. He was sort of involving himself in his own serial killing. He would be questioning the police, interviewing them, grilling them. Why aren't you solving these cases? Police ineptitude, yet again, grilling them about their lack of progress in all of these sex workers who were just disappearing or being found murdered. All the while hiding in plain sight and having an excuse to be at the scenes of these crimes. He'd even interview sex workers about, the scene and the murders that were going on. And his articles on the murders he was committing, they always ended with, we need to give sex workers more security. We can't let this happen. The police need to do better. This real, judgmental tone when it's yeah, you're the one doing it, motherfucker. And during this time, he was rubbing elbows with the Austrian elite, musicians, celebrities, pop stars, rock stars. And he was even living with a famous journalist at the time. He'd be going to red carpets, just doing all this stuff. It's wild. But over time, a quiet panic began to fester. Jack being at all the places all these women were going missing or being found murdered. At first, sure, right? Jack, he's writing about the murders, or he's just writing about the sex work red light district, just in general. So he's got a reason to be there. It's not that weird. But then it's sort of just become a little bit too much to ignore. Maybe we should look at Jack, but no. He's the poster child for rehab. It can't be him. No, it literally can't be him. It has to be somebody else. Everyone sort of started to begin shitting it that, had he bamboozled us? No, not at all. Have you read the book? He seems very genuine in his self-reflection. He wouldn't be doing that again. So it turned out that there was almost this sort of deliberate attempt not to investigate him, just in case it turned out to be him. The next step for old Jack, though, was, you want to make it, you gotta go to the old US of A and hit the big leagues. So he was hired to write a series of articles about the differences in sex work between Los Angeles and Austria. And so, he heads over there in the summer of 1991. As soon as he gets off the plane, this is oddly hilarious. He gets off the plane, he lands in LAX, and he gets off the plane and he asks a passerby to take these pictures of him, dressed in what I assume he believes all Americans are wearing all of the time. And he was so happy to be in the United States because, of course, remember his dad, he believed, we're still not sure who his dad was, but he believed his dad was an American soldier. So he was oh, it's my second homeland. He was only chuffed to be there. He shows up, he immediately goes to the LAPD and says, I'm a writer. I'm writing about, sex workers, all that kind of stuff. Can I do a ride along? Take me around. And they were yeah, sure, why not? He then began staying at the Cecil Hotel, famously haunted, which I think makes the story of Jack Unterweger just all the more creepier. that he was staying at a hotel which had a very long, very long and sort of creepy ass history of people murdered, jumping out of windows. I mean, years later, there would be the course of Elisa Lam, but I mean, that's kind of just the most recent disturbing thing that happened there, because it's had a long ass history since it was first built in was it 1920 or something like that. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, he stayed there while he was doing his killing, putting eyeballs on his, bedside lockers so he could look at eyes. And of course, Jack Unterweger must have known the entire history of the Cecil Hotel and probably picked it specifically because of that history, and he knew who he was. So he was getting off on living in this, probably the most evil hotel in the world. Just relishing the idea of continuing the hotel's sordid history. He would end up staying there for 5 weeks, and during that time, 3 more sex workers would end up murdered. Shannon Exley, Irene Rodriguez, and Peggy Booth. The same MO as always, strangled to death with their own bra. He had a great time, by the way, in case you're wondering. While he was in the States, he loved it. He was hanging out with the police all the time, rubbing shoulders with them. Apparently he would be flirting with the female police officers a lot. And he had a goal while he was there, and that was to meet his idol, who lived in Los Angeles. That was Cher. That was that's who he was. He spent so much time trying to meet her. And unfortunately for Cher, she missed out on that one. Didn't happen. Eventually, though, Jack did return to Austria, and that's when the noose sort of tightened for old Jackie. When he came home, he met with a police chief. And it was just telling him the story, oh, hey, this is what I was getting to LA. This is the differences between red light districts, I guess, and how maybe we could improve things back here in Vienna. And while they were just talking about this and that, the police chief kind of let slip, oh, hey, we're actually having this really weird series of murders that are unsolved. And they sort of only began when you got out of prison, and you've sort of been spotted in the same areas where all of these murders occurred. You're kind of a suspect. Jack immediately says that, oh, well, yeah, with my background, I can imagine. I totally get it, right? No harm, no foul. I totally understand why you would be looking at me. And he said, this isn't even the first time I've been questioned about an unsolved murder. Remember, there was that Yugoslavian woman who was seen before he went to prison that was found in the lake. He had been questioned about that, but no charges came. So he was like, this is the second time, I've been questioned about it, but it's not a big deal. So the police chief asks him, all right, you can clear this up for us almost immediately. Do you have alibis for this night, all these different nights when these women went missing? Jack was like, shit, I don't. Sorry. But I'm reformed. Have you read the book? It was clear all of the murders had the same MO, so therefore all of the murders were done by the same person, and they just began to look more and more at Jack Unterweger, who they initially did not want to look at, and nobody wanted them, but Jack couldn't give them an alibi. Witnesses had seen his car with W. Jack 1, at the scene of multiple of these murders. There was just, and every time that he would be doing a reading or a book signing or researching, a woman just happened to end up dead. By this point, there was just way too many coincidences for it to not be him. Then a survivor came forward, and this is when the investigation just went into overload. She said, much like with all the others, he had taken her, stripped her, taken her into the woods, horrifically abused her, but for one reason or another, he didn't kill her. He let her go. And so she was able to come forward and saying, yeah, Jack did this to me. And it's just matching with everything else. The police, they began tracking where Jack Unterweger had been over the last year and a bit since he got out in the summer of 1990. Tracking, oh yeah, he was here when she was killed, when she disappeared, he was in that city. They even tracked Blanca in Prague. He had been in Prague when she was killed. It was then on February 15th, 1992, 18 months after he was released from prison, that his apartment was searched by the police. But he was gone. Like a fart in the wind, Jack had gone. The search of his apartment dug up nothing really in regards to the murders they were now sort of suspecting him of. They did find a jacket that some witnesses said the man seen with the victims before they disappeared was wearing. They found a gun, which as a felon he was not allowed to have. They also found, though, a card for a restaurant in Los Angeles. And so the police began to theorize, well, he's committed a murder in Czech Republic. He was just in the States for like 5 weeks over the summer just gone. Maybe we should just have a go. So they rang up a LAPD detective and were just like, hey, we're investigating this guy, Jack Unterweger, for numerous murders of sex workers here in Austria. He was just in the United States from this date to this date. Do you have any unsolved murders of sex workers with this sort of MO during this time frame? And they said, well, shit, we do. Now, Jack had ran away with his new girlfriend, Bianca, who was only 18 years of age. He was in his 40s, she was 18, and he was extremely, as you can imagine, he was extremely controlling and abusive towards her. To get some money, he tried to get her to escort. She said no. Then he proposed, she said yes. Then he told her to start stripping, she said yes. And they'd gone to Switzerland. Now, Jack told Bianca the reason they had left Austria and gone to Switzerland was that he was just sick of all the attention. He was getting back at all. Yeah, being a celebrity, it's so hard. So hard these days. But in reality, the reason they had left was Jack had gotten a tip-off that the police were, investigating him as a suspect in these murders. He'd gotten a tip-off from a journalist friend. So he fled Austria. Then they later left Europe entirely and flew and ended up in Miami, Florida. I guess Jack was under the assumption for some reason that nobody would find him there and that there was no extradition treaty between United States and a European country. I don't know why he thought that. But while in Miami, he was hearing about all the accusations against him in the news. He even rang up live. He was live on air on an Austrian radio show defending himself, saying, these accusations were bullshit, yada, yada, yada. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so, murderous. It was then on February 27th, 1992, that Jack Unterweger and Bianca were arrested when US Marshals showed up at their door. There was actually a bit of a chase. Jack tried to do a little legger, but the US Marshals, they got him in the end, and apparently he started bawling when he was arrested, and they dragged him into cuffs.
40 minutes, we talk 40 minutes. And he talk a question what I make in LA. And I say what I make in LA. And I give my blood and my hair. This is all. But for me, it's nice. When the police have blood and hair and a dead prostitute or a dead person, I don't know. For me, it's nice. But this is not my blood, not my hair. And another thing, this detective gives me picture from a thing, I don't know. But this is for me the best. When the police have stuff, when the police have blood, hair, maybe clothes, I don't know. This is for me best. Then I can say, you have my blood, I know this murderer.
And then while he was in custody in the United States, they tested the 3 victims in Los Angeles, tested, DNA found on their bodies against his DNA. It was a complete match. So they knew he had murdered those 3. Jack was actually shitting himself at this point because he was worried he would be extradited to California, where they have the death penalty. But, no spoilers, but Jack would get the death penalty. But there was a deal done between Austria and the US, so he was taken back to Vienna, where he'd be charged with all of the murders, the murders in Austria and the US murders. He would be tried for them all back in his home country.
Aber es gibt doch scheinbar auch ein Muster, das auch dem entspricht, des Mordes, den sie in den 70er Jahren begangen haben.
Welches Muster?
Es hat zum Beispiel, wurden die erdrosselt.
Jeder Mord wird irgendwie begangen. Das ist das eine. Ich wüsste nicht, erstens, ich kenne das zu wenig, aber ich sehe zum ersten überhaupt keinen Ding nicht, weil beim ersten war ich erstens nicht allein, da war ja noch jemand mit. Zweitens ist das erste ganz anders gelaufen und das sind ja reine Triebtaten. Und bekanntlich, ich meine, das soll sich die Polizei die Gedanken machen, nur Psychiater, aber nicht ich. Ich bereue im Leben eigentlich nur eines, die Tat von 74. Alles andere kann ich nicht bereuen. Selbst die Diebstähle, die habe ich gemacht, weil ich eben kriminell war. Aber was soll ich da bereuen? Für die habe ich gekühlt.
Jack Unterweger was charged with 11 murders and using DNA found on the victims, on Jack's clothing, in his cars. It was a match. Along with his MO being the very same in every single murder, him being in the location for one reason or another. There was actually a bomb threat, by the way, called in during his trial. Now, it was fake, but it was likely called in by his supporters. And I say supporters because before his trial was even over, he had an army of people who didn't... Did you read the book? You know, they believed he could not. He was a reformed criminal. He's the fall guy. There's no way he did. He had like a huge load of people who were writing letters of support. Even some newspaper editors would write these opinion pieces about Jack Unterweger is innocent. He is not a serial killer. Again, that's another big whoops. However, on June 29th, 1994, Jack Unterweger was convicted of all of those murders and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole this time. There would be no writing a little book, you know, it was all over. There would be no Purgatory 2, Purgatory with a Vengeance for Jack Unterweger. He would not be getting out. And he knew it. So the very same day he was sentenced and he was sent back to his cell at around 3 a.m. One of the guards found him. Well, Jack had taken his shoelaces and did the very same thing he did to all those women. He did it to himself. Jack Unterweger died doing what he loved, strangling people to death. And that is the story of the Austrian Ripper. Shout out to Entering Hades. It's a great book by John Leake. That was like my main source for this entire episode. It's a wild story. And it goes truly everywhere. Truly a despicable individual and scary as all hell. A serial killer who would not have stopped killing. Actually, you know, now that I mention that, he is a serial killer who didn't stop killing. It's just his last victim was himself. And as a final thought, I do believe that, you know, people should be rehabilitated and it should be encouraged for people who commit these heinous crimes to change their ways and whatnot. But when you have a psychopathic narcissist like Jack, there's really nothing you can do for them. These types of people, like, they just can't be rehabilitated. They are liars and master manipulators. And like in Jack's case, they can hide their real selves for decades. Jack hid it for 15 years. Writing his little book, but as soon as he was able to, as soon as the opportunity presented itself to go, I mean, he couldn't even do 3 months without going back to murdering people. And he was kind of like set for life. You know, when he was released from prison, he was a celebrity, he had money, he had fame, he had everything he wanted, but no, he had to go back to killing, and 11 more women would end up victims of this. So with people like that, you know, they'll just lie and lie and lie for years and hide their true selves. And the only thing you really do with them is like lock them up and throw away the key, I guess. But that's the thing. How do you know? But anyway, that's just for me. Let me know your thoughts down below on this case and on Jack Unterweger. But that's it. So I don't know why I said what. Thank you so much for watching, folks. It really means a lot to me that you're here watching this old video. If you're looking for some more of That Chapter, please check out the That Chapter podcast, where every single Monday morning it's a brand new podcast, exclusive story told only on the podcast. Please check it out, and thank you so much to everybody who's been supporting it so far. It's doing amazing, so really, really thank you. And you know what? The next old video will be up next week. So check it out. Check it out. And, you know, you can do whatever you want as well, sure. I'm not your boss. So yeah, until the next one, please take care of each other, and please take care of yourselves. Because I love you. Mike out.